Shiva. So first question I have for you, the quick zero dilemmas, and let's see if you can make a quick answer, and then just we can discuss afterwards.
Okay.
So the first one, do you think we should optimize every page for every customer, or pick specific areas and improve the shit out of those?
So every page or specific page. I'd probably go specific. There's ROI you can calculate from specific, like not calculate, but there's a lot of more you can do with limited resources if you focus your efforts. I think the ROI tends to be a lot higher if you focus your efforts. I mean, CRO people, we literally never get any support from anyone ever. So when you have limited resources, if you're trying to fix the whole website, I'd say just try and focus on the things that you can optimize for, and the ones that are getting higher traffic, things that really make a difference. Focus on those rather than move the whole amount.
Yeah. Second one, should we call ourselves CRO people or CRO industry, or should we use another term?
Well, we're chief revenue officers, right?
Yep.
I hate CRO. I think experimentation is a good word for it. I know everyone debates this. CRO, like, we know what we do, but I like experimentation better.
Bayesian or frequentist?
I feel like this is a common one. I tend to prefer Bayesian, but like each one has their pros and cons. Neither of them's wrong, but I tend to go Bayesian as much as I can.
Yeah, nice. So then let's continue. Now that we know the most important parts of you, what do you actually do from a day-to-day basis? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I'm a senior strategist at Speero, and effectively what I do is I help manage, I like run experimentation programs for the clients, coordinate things like, experiments, hypotheses, coordinate research tests, stuff like that. Everything experimentation kind of runs through me. But one of the things I've been kind of geeking out a little bit more on is the experimentation maturity audit work that I'm doing at Speero. That's effectively helping not up-level experiments, but make better experimentation programs. That's something I'm pretty passionate about. I've built experimentation programs for, a couple companies. It's something that I really enjoy doing, and it's something that I think a lot of people tend to get wrong. They kind of fixate on like the experiments, but not necessarily the process and the program of building that experimentation program and getting better to support those individual experiments and the research behind it.
I think I've seen your colleague Ben posting about those things a bit too. So what do you guys use as determining factors for the maturity?
Determining factors. I mean, there's a lot of inputs that goes into it. We kind of start with just a general survey, like asking people that are involved in experimentation, how do they run it? And the audit piece is basically just trying to understand what is their current process and how can we utilize the current resources to get better. But also it's taking a look at the landscape of, maybe they need more resources. We have some pillars. It's strategy and culture, people and process, people and skills, data, and then like process and governance. And there's different things you could do to up-level these particular things, but it's more like one of the clients I'm working with, they maybe didn't have enough staffing, but staffing wasn't even their biggest problem. It was a process that the only experiments that they were running was feature validation. It was literally a checkbox to make sure it's not going to break the site if they did something. And that's a good use case for experimentation.
So it's not a bad check.
I mean, and you should do it for sure, but that was the only thing that they were using experimentation for, rather than like proactive feature exploration and identifying new features to build, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I did forget to ask, how did you get started with this? I mean, a lot of people don't start studying CRO or something specific like that. So how did you get started?
I tried to become a doctor. I just didn't like medicine. I feel like I've said this a lot. It's no offense to doctors. I will keep on saying this. Doctors, nurses, everyone in the medical field is doing God's work. It is so boring to me. I'm just not passionate about it. So I went to school, undergrad, for 4 years for trying to become a doctor. Didn't like it, wasn't passionate about it. So didn't pursue it any further. I started working
There's a
at
lot of experiments you can do with medicine,
Oh,
though.
sure. Sure. But like there's blood and there's just like disgusting things that you have to deal with. Like there's code that you can look at and sometimes code can look disgusting, but blood you physically hold it and like ugh,
Yeah.
not about that. Um
So
so
there's a different feel to it. Yeah.
yeah. So instead of dealing with that, I felt like I'd rather um digital marketing is something that's like interesting to me. Everything techie, like I love like computers and learning about tech stuff. Like I always have the latest tech stuff. So that was what like started me on like maybe I should do something in tech. And then I had an opportunity to work at a digital marketing agency that kind of focused a little bit on like UX research and like design. And that's where I was like, this is kind of interesting. And one of the things that stood out to me was like I read this book, Don't Make Me Think, by Steve Krug. And God, that just it made me think, ironically, about how a lot of websites are just so poorly designed that you have to think, and there's so much friction from just getting from point A to point B. And I was like, why is everything so complicated? And that got the gears turning as like, okay, so there's a lot of like UX things that I think is really interesting to me that I think we could do better on as a web. And then, lo and behold, like experimentation started coming out and becoming more and more prominent, especially with tools allowing people to run experiments. So like, oh, so I could run tests to validate or invalidate that. Oh, that's awesome. And then there's the tech side of it where it's on websites. I think the one thing that stands out to me is like the psychology. I don't know if you are similarly as interested in it as me, but like, God damn, the psychology in the way that people use websites is just so interesting to me. Like you see
Yeah.
people who like, go ahead.
I studied psychology, but during psychology there was nothing about online. Fortunately. So all the things that I learned about psychology online is about through reading books, working in it myself, doing all that experience, but nothing from university. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if that's been fixed by now that they use online data, but yeah,
But
not back
like
then.
the funniest things about the psychology of user experience is that it's almost like a cat and maybe not cat and mouse, but it's you get to just like
Yeah.
what other tool allows you to literally watch someone use your website and like it's creepy as fuck, but it's also awesome data.
Yeah, well, and the amount of data, right? I mean, you can get user data with whatever
Oh
tool. I
yeah.
mean, if you design a phone or a ticketing machine, you can get user data, people using your system, but it's not all users. That's the amazing thing, of course, with going online. With if you look at the sample sizes you use at studies at university, that doesn't even start to compare with what we have online. The
Oh yeah.
gold mine we have here. Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's even like
I've
you
done
think about like
studies with in the more neurology parts. You had like 8 participants.
I mean, even think about like offline mailers. To me, that's like you get something in the mail. You can't A/B test that. And what kind of data are you actually getting? Like, what is the open rate of like the person opening the letter? You don't even know if it got delivered, right?
Yeah,
Versus to your point, the data you have online is so freaking robust. There's so much you could geek out on. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's like if you go into like a session recording heat map tool or whatever, and you just watch session recordings for 4 hours without any reason to look at it, you've probably wasted your time because you're just watching people use your site without any reason. Sometimes there's too much data, but like too much data with an ability to filter down to what you need to is far better than like eight eight people.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do get into the paralysis side with online. That's definitely something that's a real thing that you have no idea. Okay, well, where can we start? We have so much tools that we can use. Is this also something? So tool use, is that something that's part of that maturity model? What people are using, or what they are able to utilize for their website?
Yep. I mean, I think the tools and research is like two lockstep things where you need tools to help you research, but you also like everything's so interconnected, but like you definitely need tools to capture data and you need tools to actually conduct research. So sometimes it could be a binary, like, do you even have these tools to capture it? But kind of like to that data point, if you are simply tracking things like macro level conversions and like AOV, but you're not tracking actual interaction with like things on the website, micro conversions, you're not understanding the behavior. If you're simply just looking at macro level things, which a lot of people who run experiments do, just simply look at a fixation of one metric and be like, we ran a test, did it improve conversion rate? Yes, no. Without understanding why, without using another tool to corroborate what happened versus not, you're running into these limitations. And to your point, like if you don't necessarily have all these tools, you're limiting yourself. And that could be an easy like recommendation to improve your maturity is get better tools or get a tool to do something. But having tools doesn't make you good. Like just because you have an experimentation tool, it doesn't mean you're going to be at a maturity level of like, top tier. Because if you just have a tool but you're not running tests, or you have a tool but you're running crappy tests, that's almost as bad as just not having a tool at all, because you could be hurting your, your users and your user experience.
Yeah, and I think I have a question, at least somewhat related. There's a lot of there's a lot of BS going on with how people are using the tools, how they are, like I said, focusing on experimentation, but not having a decent program behind it. And I can imagine, especially when you work in an agency, you've seen many of those programs running or not running. And the question is from Tracy Laragno. How do you maintain a no BS style? And apparently, well, she suggested me asking this to you, and apparently you are known, at least to her, for having this no BS style, and that's definitely something I recognize with the posts I see you, the things I see you posting on LinkedIn.
I'll take it. I'll take it because I feel like there's so much of just like snake oil salesman in terms of like experimentation, where like there's a lot of people who'll be like, we'll guarantee you like X amount of dollars, or we'll guarantee you X amount of lift in conversion rate. And I think that's just such a terrible way to, you're fixating on the wrong KPIs. And you're going to box yourself into doing stuff that isn't necessarily right for user experience, and creating something that's worthwhile for like customer lifetime value. Specifically, your question is like, what was it? How do you maintain a no BS lifestyle? Or style?
Well, not necessarily lifestyle, but well, lifestyle. If you wish to go into that, that's fine too. But how do you maintain a no BS style in those posts and when communicating with those clients?
So I think for me, it's just about transparency. I think like I think a lot of times CRO people tend to have it be like, this is my baby, this is my thing. No one else gets to influence it because this is mine. And that's such a crappy way to like build trust. Because if you're just saying like, these are the tests, this is my algorithm for our prioritization, and people are like, can I learn about it? And you're like, no, leave me alone. Like that's not going to build any kind of trust that you're doing anything good, especially if you're running tests that are losing. But even like, I'd be skeptical if like I had no access to your CRO program, but you're like, I'm pumping out 50, 70, 80% conversion rate lifts or whatever it is. I'd be like, okay, tell me more. And you'd be like, no. I'd be like, all right, well, I don't trust that. I think as CROers, we're always just skeptical about it. So I think like that transparency helps foster authenticity, which I think is important to me. Like I swear all the time, I'm going to speak my mind. I don't really care what other people think, because I'm going to tell you what I feel. And that's the truth. You're not getting bullshit from me. I'm just going to speak the truth. You'll get a sense of authenticity from me. You may disagree, but you know where you stand, where I stand. And then I think that leads to trust. That if you're open, if you're authentic, if you're like, if a test loses big and you're like, yeah, I mean, this was our hypothesis. This is the research that went into it. Going into this test, we felt really good about it, and it didn't win. And that sucks, but it's okay because we have these other tests, and guess what? We learned some things from this, and we're going to move on. That breeds trust that like when you win, people can trust that you actually won. And when you lose, you at least put the thought and effort and research into it. You're not just picking out some random things that like, I saw what Amazon's doing. Let's test that. You know,
Yeah.
it just builds that trust.
Do you have? So I have this feeling, hypothesis maybe that, and hopefully you can shine some light on that. That's in. If we compare how the zero or experimentation market works, Europe versus US, my hypothesis is that in US it's more focused on running more experiments to see what works, and then just shooting and see if something sticks. I'm very much generalizing. I'm realizing, and then in Europe, because and my hypothesis is that because the markets are way smaller, you cannot get away with that. It's easier to do that for an English website and a global English website. You can just run a lot of experiments, and something will eventually stick. You have no idea why, but because you can have that volume, it still works somewhat. You can still be somewhat successful with that. While in Europe, and I think I guess it works for all other languages. Basically, the market is so much smaller that you have to be smarter about it. You have to do your research upfront to come up with a good hypothesis, and then try to validate that. Is that something that makes sense to you, or is it totally different, a wrong view of the market that I have?
That's interesting. I never considered that. I don't know. That's a good thought. Like in the interest of authenticity, that's a sound hypothesis. I'm trying to think of like, so you're
And I also saw some supporting data, and this is that I did see some English markets, English merchant, but then in B2B where the markets are much smaller. By nature of being in B2B, and they do need to be smarter about it. Then the mass running experiment doesn't work anymore because again their target audience is much smaller.
That's interesting.
It depends a bit on the.
That is interesting. I feel like I've worked with some of the clients that are smaller, and as a process of that, they have to be research driven. They have to focus on the research and be smart about it. The other thing I will say is like I do wonder if there's a difference in culture between like US culture versus European culture that potentially that's the layer of leading into it, which I don't know if you're kind of alluding to that, but I do think that plays into like, you know, maybe in the US it's a little bit more like try it and see if it works versus in Europe it's like a little bit more skepticism like, hey, like I'm not just going to blindly trust you. And I do wonder if maybe there's a little bit more of that in Europe, that there's not skepticism, but more like, why? And maybe a little bit more inquisitive versus US is like, well, let's try it and see what happens.
Yeah. And by the way, and that's interesting. I'm going to think about that one. By the way, when I say in Europe or the smaller websites that they need to be smart about it, I still think, I mean, if you can just create a lot of experiments and do that, and it works, it can still be smart to do that. It saves you a lot of time and resources on doing the research.
Yep.
So if that works for you, go you.
Well, truthfully,
but I think
truthfully, I view experimentation as like a spoke of the hub of research. And I don't know if people agree or disagree on that, but like research is doing things to understand behavior and like trying to understand kind of what's going on. Research includes data. Research like analytics data, it includes heat maps, but an experiment is data. You've tried A versus B, and it's data to inform something. So that's kind of, people always feel weird about like that.
I often tell, or when I try to explain this process, I tell people that run the website, say, okay, you're already doing the experiments. Your content team and your design team and your developer, they're already doing the experiments, but you're not validating it, so you have no idea what the results are. And so maybe that's a bit of fear mongering there, but if it works,
well, that's kind of back to the point about like. You can run an experiment, but if you don't have the proper resources to analyze it, validate, data sanity, like research, then running an experiment doesn't make you, like, it doesn't provide value if you don't have the proper supporting of process to analyze and do the right things behind it.
Yep.
It's just running an experiment. It's the same thing like Personalization. Oh, let's flip the switch on and let's personalize. Well, have you tested it? Like, are you going to constantly evolve the personalization? Or are you just going to flip a switch and be like, let's just personalize because I read an article that said it works?
Yeah. So how do you at Speero? How do you then position or maybe even sell CRO or experimentation? Is it you just spoke about, okay, if you're doing it for optimizing conversion rates, those might not be the right KPIs. I've seen a lot of people talking about, okay, we shouldn't frame it as optimization at all. It should be about risk management. How do you guys position that with clients?
I personally always talk about test to learn. So the way I talk about it is every test that's run will generate an insight. So like I talked about how experimentation is like a hub of research. Every test you run will teach you something. And I'm not going to run a test that's not going to tell me something to guide the next test and the next test and the next test. I have a plan that, like, if a test loses, maybe that plan gets changed or altered based on the insights. But every test will generate an insight that alters the strategic plan. Versus, like, trying to think like very root level, like a button color test. Like, if I run a green versus orange on our homepage, what's that going to tell us strategically? Like, nothing strategic. It might give you a test win, it might give you a test loss, but like there's nothing really like, oh, what's next? Blue. Like, that's not really as helpful. Like, maybe there's a little bit of insight with contrast, like if that. But like, it's not like content gating strategy, pricing strategy, like a pricing, like a questionnaire or wizard for like B2B, like that stuff. That's super interesting. One, because that's interesting research. Two, like win or lose, you're learning something about that. So I think we tend to focus a lot of our tests around insights and talk about this is what we're learning about your audience every test. And then if it wins, by the way, it also generated X amount in revenue, Y amount of conversions, whatever it is. But the focal point for me that I always like to use is talk about the insights first. Because what I've learned like very early in my career is like if I only fixate on like conversion rate, you're almost training everyone to also focus only on conversion rate rather than the insights.
Yeah.
So instead, just flip it around and talk about the insights generated always, win or lose. And then you're focusing on a program that is generating insights that even if you lose 10 tests, you've generated insights for those 10 tests as stuff like we shouldn't do. And it's good that we tested it because we didn't move forward, like that risk mitigation you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. You saved a lot of resources on not implementing all those
Yep.
things. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's way more interesting to have. I mean, the UI part can be very interesting. I mean, if that's a big issue, that can be a huge blocker on many levels, of course. But the strategic things are way more interesting. Validate your whole business ID. Are people actually interested in what's in the features that you're trying to sell them? Maybe they're interested in something completely different, and what's price elasticity on your product that can make a huge difference for a company, way bigger than changing the color of a button.
And to take that a step further, like think about experimentation maturity. So if you're a one-man team and you're running experiments for button color tests, if people who are looking at your program are seeing button color tests, they're going to be like what is the ROI of this program? Why do we have this if all we're testing is button colors or some root level tests? Versus if you're talking about strategic things that is affecting the whole business, obviously with the qualifier that you are in fact in lockstep with the business, that you're not like optimizing for like AOV and the business is optimizing for like CLTV and your metrics are just totally mismatched. Like obviously you don't want to make sure you're aligned with that. But if you're providing these insights that are so interesting that maybe is shifting the way that the business thinks about things or marketing or anyone else like brand, you're generating these insights that are like, holy crap, this content gating strategy that we have to generate leads didn't work. Like we removed the gate and we got the same amount of leads. We need to change the business. And then like your boss's boss hears about that. And like, how do we find this out? Oh, the CRO program. Holy shit. Let's throw some money at this if they're generating those insights, and that's a way for you to scale your program up.
Yeah, Yeah, yeah. I think a challenge there is that a lot of CRO specialists or CRO teams are often positioned in the marketing team, and
Hmm.
they have really different goals than they're not necessarily into test and learn.
It is painful. Like it is a struggle with, and that's another thing that we talk about in maturity is like, where does experimentation live? Is it a decentralized model, centralized model, hybrid, like whatever model it may be? But holy crap, if you're not on the product team, good luck trying to get prioritized resourcing to help you drive the program. And the solution to that's like maybe hire some folks on your experimentation team. Like when I was at Gartner, I hired a developer to sit on my team to help bypass some of the limitations I had. But again, like it is a struggle, especially if experimentation sits on a marketing team to get the resources they need to scale the program, to grow and get bigger. I think in a perfect world, if you could have like, I think each model kind of has its pros and cons, but I think in a perfect world, like a decentralized model where um, you have some resources sitting on individual teams, and then I guess that's a hybrid model, not decentralized. But like you have some individual specialists sitting on like a marketing team, brand team, dev team, UX, whatever, and then they all report to like a hub of experimentation folks, and those are the ones who like set the process, set the governance. Ben and I geek out about this, and he's like very passionate about like that person that sits, the people who sit in the hub, like shouldn't look at a single test. All their only jobs are like process. Their only jobs are making sure that everyone's following the right processes. They don't look at a single test. They just make sure everything's flowing properly. And then you have the specialists on every team kind of
Yeah,
flowing through everything.
yeah. Yeah, I think the one easy way if you're stuck in the marketing team might be just to get budget for to hire an external
Yep.
agency. That's often the fastest way to ensure that you actually can do
Yep.
stuff.
And I think that's why there's a little bit of like scrappiness that a lot of CRO people tend to have. Like you have a CRO person that's a coder and a data analyst and can kind of design on the side. Like I think every experimentation person should have a good understanding of all of these skills. But you'll often find like I can code, not like not like top tier coding, but I can code pretty well. I can design pretty well. I'm pretty good UX UI person. Like you have to have these skills because growing in an organization that like only hires one specialist and they're expected to drive the whole program is is oftentimes what happens. In a perfect world that doesn't happen, but it oftentimes does happen where it's one person's tasked to like do everything. And that's always hard. So sometimes that person has to put on a lot of hats. Sometimes in a perfect world, if you have those like dedicated UX functions, dev functions, build relationships with these folks and just try and get some dedicated resourcing, even if it means maybe you have to trim down the sizing of tests, as long as maybe your core to your hypothesis, maybe just pushing some stuff out and just get a little scrappy. Because if you can get a little scrappy and prove yourself, then that starts to get some eyes and maybe you start to get a little bit more money flowing. And
Hey, something else I wanted to ask you. So I saw this interesting post this morning, post on LinkedIn by Petra Lilander. Already asked her to come on board for an episode. But I'm curious what you think of this. She had some frustration, I think. She posted about, and she basically quoted some responses she got, I think, from people inside the company or talking about Zero. Asking her, I guess, so the quote being, why can't we just put this on the website product? Experimentation will just slow us down. And, but we know our customers need this and our competition already has this. So why can't we just implement it? So, not necessarily also for Petra, I guess, but I guess many CRO people will come across comments like this in their career. How would you advise them to respond to this?
God, that's so triggering. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. Just it's like it's one of those things that we call JDIs, like just do it. A lot of people tend to just be like, well, let's just do it because we need to just do it. I'd say like one thing you should probably do is just think about what is the risk. Sometimes you have to be honest and be like, if it's like, I don't know, swapping out like a video on the home page to something new. Like, what is the data supporting it? So is it truly, truly, truly something that's impactful versus not? Like maybe the brand team's like, we want to change to this new video, and they're like, test, test, test. But how many people click on the video? Is it like 0.2% of people clicking on the video and they only watch 3 seconds of it? Like, in a perfect world, you want to test it because maybe that new video is just going to be that much better. But if that interaction rate's so low, like sometimes it's okay to just be like, fine, we'll concede. And maybe you take that coin and put it in your back pocket and be like, we conceded on this, but we make sure the next thing that you want to just do it. We cash in that chip and test it. But yeah, I mean, risk mitigation is just, there's so many things that I've tested in my career that I'm like, this is a guaranteed winner. And you run the test and it loses dramatically. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's good we tested that. And like, it wasn't a question that you weren't going to test it versus not, but like, we're wrong a lot. A lot of people are wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. But risk mitigation is so important that you just don't know until you know. And sometimes it's a little bit of a personality thing that you have to just like, sometimes it's worth digging into like, why? Why do we need to be so quick? Why do we need it quickly? Is it your boss's boss really pushing some pressure on this? Is it like, maybe it's worth digging into like why they want to push it so quickly? And I think that's something like specifically with hippos, it's helped me understand and try and work with people who hippo highest paid person's opinion. Like someone who's like, your boss's boss says do something, so you have to do something. And sometimes it's helpful to understand why they want to do it, because potentially that context is helpful to talk them off the ledge of maybe testing something or restructuring a test. Or maybe it's like, maybe that's something of a lesson learned that like you have a process issue. Like we talked about, maturity. Maybe you have a process issue that like they have spent 5 months working on something and you didn't know about it. If you had known about it because it was a process issue, you could have started on day one and be like, by the way, we're testers. We can help test it for you. And they're like, oh, great. And there's, a lesson learned that you have a process issue and you just need to work in experimentation earlier to help them out. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to be like glass half full, because if I was glass half empty, I might cry a little bit because of how many times I've heard that.
Yeah. And then just fire the client, or just if you work there yourself, resign and and
I think
move
it's
on.
more
It's also an option,
it's just
of
like
course.
trying to get an understanding, like why are they trying to do it so quickly? Like what is the reason behind it? Is there a process thing that maybe you need to have relooked and be like, well, experimentation needs to be involved earlier?
Yeah.
A lot of times, like what we see, I was working with another client. We were talking about something and they're like, we're going to roll out this feature. I was like, why don't you guys test it? And they're like, we can't test it. And we're like, oh, sure you can. You just have to do this, this, and this. They're like, oh, okay. And they're like, it clicks in their brain that like they didn't understand they could test something in a particular way. So sometimes it's just education that they didn't know they could test it, so they just didn't test it, and then they just moved on. But CRO and experimentation is just so often misunderstood that leads to a lot of problems rather than like actual malice of people who are like hippos who are just like, I just want to do it. I don't care what the results say. I want to do it because it looks pretty.
Yeah, and often I guess when the understanding isn't there, it's also for a lot of people, I think the managers that need to manage the CRO team, or the people coming up with those ideas for the CRO team to validate, that it feels very personal to them. Like I said, most things fail. And that could get personal very quickly if you shoot down 9 out of 10 ideas that the designer has. He might not like you very much and stop coming with things to you. So you need to start working with them, understanding what their goals are, not necessarily their personal goal, but inside the business. What are they? What are their KPIs? What are their OKRs, or whatever system you use, and understand that and help them achieve those business goals, instead of framing it, or at least having them perceive this as being very personal to their well, maybe their life, their lives.
Well, let me
work.
put that in context. If you're a UX person and a CRO person comes to you and they're like, hey, we should test this. And the UX person's like, okay, cool, let's test it. And then they literally run the test and it loses by, let's say, minus 10%. They literally give you evidence that your baby is ugly in a data-driven way, right? And if you're a UX person, you're like,
yes,
damn, that sucks.
That hurts.
So like, there's that context is glass half full, where you're just like calling their baby ugly and literally using data to prove it, which is like would put a lot of people on defense. When reframe it, be like, look, you have this design, let's test it, because maybe this first iteration isn't the best, but let's test it. Let's make it so that instead of, you know, it being a minus 10% or a plus 2%, what if their design was so kick-ass that it was a plus 17%? Then you have provided data to the UX person that their baby is beautiful. And then that UX person goes tell their boss, my thing is 17% better than the original. So it's looked as it should be as a partnership.
You don't have to tell your boss it took 10 iterations to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just but I think that's an issue, that it's painful in the beginning, and if you're not used to that process, that indeed feels like someone is killing off your baby. And that's, I guess that's part of the education that you need to go through with your organization.
Well, and I think that's like back to the education piece. It's about the CRO person coming from I'm here to help. I'm here to make you look good. I'm here to test your thing so it looks good. Like you think about even just like minus UX, like let's look at product. If a person's designing a feature, if a product owner said, the decision we need to make is develop this feature, and there was no experimentation done to validate, run anything. They spent 6 months validating this feature, building it, or not validating, building it, getting it to live, and then CRO person comes in and tests it, and it's like minus 6%. Like that's going to make them look really bad. So instead, that's where there might be some hesitation from these people to be like, I don't want to test it because it can make me look bad. And the same way with the UX people. So there's a lot of these avenues, like even dev people, like, I don't want to test it because if it's broken and it doesn't look good, like everything is like, it's understandable that people would see it as have a defense mechanism kick in. When the reality is, we are here as experimentation folks to make you look good, to take what you're doing and make it better, or prove that maybe it's not the exact right thing. But instead of you in like that product person, if we were involved in, very early, we could have maybe done research to validate that this wasn't worth doing, or maybe use the research to be like, it's worth doing, but the design isn't great. But like, we're here to help support you to make the right decisions to make you look good and you look good and you look good, and everyone, and even like the business metrics, we're here to support the business. We're not your enemy. We're your best friends. Yep.
Exactly. And what would you say? So the first part of Petra's comment was, or her colleagues' comments, experimentation will just slow us down. What would you, how would you counter the argument? That's, I mean, fair enough.
I mean, would you rather be slow or bad? Like,
fair enough. Yeah, that's a perfect response, I guess.
Like I mean, yeah, you could be slow, but would you rather make the right decisions and be slow, or probably make the wrong decisions and be fast? And like, there's a whole thing, and like, there is a legitimate argument for like, I'd rather be fast and then test and then like continue to iterate. There is an argument for that. I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm not saying always be slow and always be right, but it's not usually the case that people who are like, it's going to slow us down, are people who are like, we want to go fast so that we could test it and continue to iterate and make it better. Oftentimes, from what my experience, it's like, let's roll it out very quickly because we have something else we need to do. And we're not going to really, like, maybe we'll have some health metrics and check up on it every now and then, but it's not like a concerted process to like go quick, test, research, and like keep it going and keep the funnel flowing to optimize. It's kind of just like, let's go quick and move on.
Yeah, or those are requests like, but it's Black Friday next week, so we need to do it right now, or we have this campaign, the TV campaign going live, but then you're just you got involved in the process way too late. That's something that's in the process that you need to.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Nice. Hey, I don't want to take too much more of your time. Let's thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking us through your process and the no BS style. let's keep that up. There wasn't a lot of swearing today, so let's we kept it.
Kept my sailors out the minimum,
I guess. One question I do have for you as a final question. What are the things in your own process in working with clients that you want to improve this year, like the next 12 months? What are you excited about? The new things that you're gonna try and implement?
That's a good question. I probably need to.
What's on your okay? I
probably
list?
need to do some deeper reflecting on this, but I think for me, it's something that I think I'm good at. I'm not going to toot my own horn. I think I'm great at, but I think I can be better to support the business better, which is keep on being annoying about understanding what the business is trying to do. So like I talked about a little bit before, is like, what is the business trying to optimize for? What are their priorities? And making sure experimentation is matching to it. From an internal perspective, it is a lot easier to understand those pieces because you're literally talking to everyone. It's easier to understand the business context because you're talking to everyone on a daily basis. You're having these conversations and you build these relationships. As an agency, it can be a little bit more difficult to truly understand the business direction and be able to adapt and adjust in advance and like understand it. Sometimes it'll be like, they'll have some plans kind of coming down the pipeline and we want to make sure that we support it, but we only learn about it when they knew about it like maybe last week and they knew about it for 2 months. So it's being a little bit more annoying, but like trying to truly understand the business goals and objectives to support the business in the absolute best way possible, rather than kind of confining our experiments to stuff that we maybe entirely kind of see on our own. And again, that's not saying that we're bad at it, we're really good at it, but I do think there's another level of really, really pestering executives to understand what they're trying to optimize for. Because I think on one hand, that'll help us be better experimenters, but two, that annoyingness will help executives. I'm not trying to say like Pavlov's dog, but like it'll almost train them to like think of experimentation as top of mind, so that whatever internal research, whatever people we talk to internally on those teams, they'll get the support because we're being annoying about experimentation in a good way. Like we keep it top of mind so that they'll get the support, so that we'll get the support to help them. And I think it's just something that'll keep on helping if we just keep experimentation top of mind, continue to support their business so they see the value, they love it, and then they feed more money into it, and then we're more helpful. And it's just that positive feedback cycle.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I think that's really powerful advice. I mean, I always advise people to, one of the first things that you should or teams that you should talk to is probably your finance team to figure out, okay, what actually drives the business? Where is the money being made? And that's really interesting for you as a Speero person that and maybe you work at a company, you think, okay, let's increase conversion rate or revenue or profit, but maybe they're not even interested in those. They just want to grow market share. And that's the main thing. You have had a big investment, and the goal is to grow as fast as possible. You can even lose money. And it's really that's a completely different ball game than when you're already there, and then maybe just the only thing is profit. Yeah. That's a totally different.
I would even add to that and say, as any CRO research person, you should always be talking to like your sales team, your marketing team, your brand team, your dev team, live chat team, support team, and like talk to these people because they have insights. They deal with stuff that you don't deal with. So if you're optimizing for sales and like you're trying to just increase the raw amount of sales, And then you go talk to the sales team and they're like, we've been getting a lot of shit leads recently. Then they're probably, then like, you're not doing anyone any favors because you're wasting their time and artificially making your program look good.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's having these conversations, but also those guys are on the front lines. They see all that. So they have different data. They have different ideas. They have different things that you can use to help guide your program, because maybe the sales guy's like, man, all these people are complaining about this one question because they never know how to answer it. And you're like, oh, okay, we should test that. And then you get ideas from these other people that maybe your research never uncovered, or maybe your marketing team, like, it's have these connections. Also, again, it pushes experimentation to top of mind for everyone. The more you grow your influence and reach, the more people are talking about it, the more people are interested in it, the more buy-in you're going to get, the more interest you're going to get, the more people are going to be like, yeah, let's test it. And then again, positive feedback loop, that just gets more attention, gets you more money in the bank to grow your program.
Nice. Yeah, have that as one of your OKRs. Talk to as many departments within your organization
Yep.
as you can. Shiva, thank you so much, and I hope to read more of your posts on LinkedIn.
Likewise.
Very
Thanks
soon.
for having me.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.